We appreciate you and the work that you all are doing. It feels like Florida is the canary in the coal mine in so many ways. So I want to zero in, if we could, on this effort to get rid of mail in ballots and voting machines because we're in a situation right now where the voting machines have to be certified. And depending on what company they're coming from, that's questionable. Who's in charge of these companies is questionable. But this effort to get rid of mail in ballot voting, it's a problem. Talk to us about what you all are seeing on the ground in Florida and how the latest news, including what's happening in the state of Texas, is landing for all of you.
Certainly, I want to be clear that this argument Donald Trump is trying to attempt to make around vote by mail ballots isn't new. I don't know if you'll recall, but after the 2020 election or during the 2020 election, he put out an all call to the Republicans, advising them not to use vote by mail ballots and
Right.
to instead vote on election day and subsequently lost that election. And so I think this is another retribution campaign tactic that he is using to get revenge on this particular method. But here in his home state of Florida, where he won this past election, and I am Kamala Harris's former state director for the 2024 election, can tell you he won by 13 points. More than 1 million voters used vote by mail in this past election. And if it had not been for vote by mail during the 2020 election, Black voters would have been at adverse risk and harm because they weren't able to access the ballot box. 8.4% more Black people used it. And as a result,
Wow.
our governor here in the state of Florida made it harder for people to use it in the following elections by wiping our vote by mails clean of 4 million people and requiring them to sign up every single election cycle.
Oh my
So
God.
this attack isn't new. It is certainly an example of his overreach and another tactic to steal the upcoming election and potentially the 2028 along with the 2026 elections that we are preparing for.
Right. And one of the callers that we had on earlier today, caller, you have to forgive me for misplacing your name, but they indicated that there's also a concern that if you get rid of mail in ballot voting, in addition to what we heard on the clip, meaning that you're going to now disenfranchise disabled people, you're going to disenfranchise veterans, you're going to disenfranchise people who physically have no other way of voting, it also creates a situation where if you are at the same time flooding the streets of certain cities, tending to be blacks or not white, cities that are led by non white people, and you're flooding the streets with the FBI and the DHS and the NYPD and, well, for us NYPD and the DEA and the ATF and all these other agencies and organizations, when if that's still happening, or if it's happening at an increased level around the time of elections, that means people are going to physically have to confront the risk of being pulled over, the risk of harassment, the risk of police intervention because there's no other way for them to vote. And if, God forbid, we have a repeat of what we've seen before, with these militia style folks posting up at election sites, talking about how in an open carry state, they have the right to openly carry outside your poll site. That is going to have a chilling effect as well. When the caller mentioned that, I made a note that I wanted to raise that issue with you. What do you see about the potential for that also being a deterrent to voting and another form of voter suppression?
Certainly. I think you laid it out perfectly that this is another chilling effect. We saw last year the Republican Party recruit tens of thousands of election poll workers, and they weren't designed to be there to help voters. They were there to intimidate voters,
Mm.
particularly Black voters. When I am at my polling place and am greeted by a police officer and not a well trained election poll worker, I have no interest in walking in that building or even pushing back if I have issues. And so, someone who won't push back, someone who won't get the help that they need, also won't be able to participate in an election. And so they can say that they are being helpful. They could say that this is about safety, but it is about ensuring that people actually don't participate. It is another voter suppression tactic in the long list of voter suppression tactics. Here in the
Mm.
state of Florida, Governor DeSantis has made it easier for folks to carry guns and has also attempted to lower that age in this state. We know who these bills are directed towards. We know what communities are going to be the most impacted by it, and we know who's going to be the less likely to speak up because voter education is already impacting our communities. And to create another situation where they now have to safeguard themselves, Black voters at the polls, we now could create another form of a race riot in our communities. And that's
Jesus.
helpful to no one.
Yeah. Well, it's helpful to white nationalists who only want to see
Correct.
themselves in power. Jasmine, you've seen, we often, because as I mentioned earlier, Florida is the canary in the coal mine. We have often on this show used your state as an example of the horrors that will come if we don't act in other states. And one of the things we say, this is not, not a phrase we came up with here, but what happens in the Confederacy or Florida or Texas as individuals, if not the entirety, never stays in the Confederacy. And so, as you are seeing what's happening in Texas and you're seeing sort of the
Mhm.
spread, you all have experienced this in real time on the ground with these hand drawn maps, these awful ass maps that your governor put forward. Now, honestly, we call him the Nazi to Satan DeSantis here. So, that's just our language. You don't have to use that framing. But we have seen what it looks like and what the disenfranchisement of voters looks like when we look at what's happening in Florida. But what has been the lived experience as a result of that voter suppression? Oftentimes we
Mm.
talk about voter suppression, but we don't connect it to the different levels of access to resources in our community, the different levels of access to potential power and capacity. What has been the result on the lives of Black Floridians as a result of having experienced this form of voter suppression?
So let me first start by saying that I send my love, prayers, and support to those Texas Democrats who are
Yes.
standing in the face of what it looks like to be targeted by the federal and state government, to Representative Collier, who is holding it down by herself in those chambers. She
Yes.
may not be bound by chains, but she is still bound by what is happening in this state. And we also are bound in the state of Florida by what is happening as it relates to redistricting.
Mm.
Our governor decided to draw his own maps after our Florida legislature had already done the job that they are constitutionally required to do. He felt like those maps weren't racist enough. He felt like those maps weren't bigoted enough. He felt like those maps did not take away enough Black political power.
My
And so
God.
he did it himself. And he eliminated 50% of Black representation in the state of Florida. Florida is a large state. From Orlando to North Florida, there is not a single Black, a single Hispanic person, or a single Democrat that represents those people. Half of the state are currently dealing with Republican leaders in Congress who have ignored their needs, who are
Mm.
not having conversations with them, who are refusing to have town halls and face them for the decisions that they are making about voting for bills that will impact them in generations to come. This is what it looks like when we allow this authoritarianism to take over our state. Black,
Mm.
immigrant, Hispanic folks, brown folks get left behind in the dust. We are not considered, we are not thought of, and with that also goes our resources.
Mm.
Can you imagine living in rural communities where a number of these people are located in this part of the state and they are not getting what they need? Health centers are being taken away. And so we now are faced with a situation where our governor has ran so quickly to the start of the line to say, Daddy Trump, I am prepared to take even more seats away. I am prepared to eliminate even more representation in the state of Florida. Give me the opportunity to do that. And the state of Florida is currently laying the groundwork to head back to Tallahassee this fall and
Mm.
chip away somewhere between 3 to 5 more congressional seats. Right now, Florida has 20
Wow.
Republican congressional members and 8 Democratic members. That could completely topple by the end of this year. And it's illegal. It is unconstitutional
Mm.
to do. And none of that matters to anyone who is currently in leadership in this administration. It certainly doesn't matter to DeSantis because he doesn't believe in, working with his own legislature, doesn't even trust them to carry the water for him.
Jasmine, as I'm listening to you, my mind is going back to what it must have been like for our ancestors at the end of the 1800s when they could
Mm,
see Reconstruction being demolished around them. I sometimes will use the word dismantled, and then one of the listeners was like, "Dismantling implies that they intend to put it back together in some other way, shape, or form. They're demolishing this."
mhm,
And that, Jasmine, as you likely well know, led to an almost another century of just beyond slave like conditions for our communities. And I've posed this question, what would happen if we could go back in time and warn the coastal Africans, hey, these ships is coming. Don't trust these people. They don't mean you no good. Like, what would happen if we could go back in time and prepare? And history is the ultimate preparer in so many
Mm,
ways, and we are now reliving what our ancestors went through, and some of us are learning about reconstruction for the very first time. And I'm mindful of the fact that as much as I hold on to a space of optimism and a space of we got to organize to get our needs met, and we can do this, and the ancestors got us, and whomever you pray to is going to pour out the anointing, and if I got to heat tie my bow tie and nam yo ho and gekyo at the same time while doing my downward dog, I'm gonna do all of it because and do my civic work, we can make it happen. But what you're out, not but, period. In addition to that, what you are outlining for me is a recognition, and y'all hear me when I say this. I'm not suggesting that we think about this from a place of defeat, but just from a space of analysis. And it feels to me, Jasmine, that we are in a situation where the solutions that we seek, because they built this system and they understand where the bodies are buried, they understand where the
mm,
bones are alive, they understand the secrets, the ins and outs, the machinations. We be focused on registering to vote. Meanwhile, they got a whole ass other form of shadow government happening. It feels like in some ways we are being abandoned again by the governing institutions and apparatus of this nation. And if that's the case, if we are going back into a Jim Crow, as an organizer, as somebody whose work is in this area, what should we be thinking about if we are living in
mm,
states where the complete and total electoral disenfranchisement of the black community is the goal? They know how to accomplish that goal. This is their system. They done did it before. This is just a repeat of what they've done before. What
mm.
does it look like for us to get our needs met outside of this system if we really are going to be forced into a FUBU reality without the economic infrastructure that we had, without the professional infrastructure that we had? Talk to us about what life looks like as a member of a population that has been intentionally abandoned by the governing bodies.
Sadly, we are in a position where it is dangerous and it is harmful to even think about what a world looks like to operate outside of the bounds of a government because we are so institutionalized within it. We have relied on these systems for so long that when they are dismantled and crumbled, there is nowhere for us to go. And
Mm,
so mutual aid needs to be the new guide. It needs to be something that we are thinking about, and we need to think about it beyond the generation we are currently operating in.
mm,
What do we, because right now we are actively in a war that we are utilizing tools that are not new. We're utilizing systems that we aren't inside of and we can't be a part of. We should not worry about operating inside of. We should be reimagining what it looks like. But there is danger for so many vulnerable people that the option to operate outside of them just leaves you without. It leaves you with lack. It is hard to tell someone or even ask someone who is providing for themselves barely, right? Who can't make ends meet currently, think about doing something different from the safety nets, whether they are fragile and breaking and cracking at the seams. Despite that, how do you think about what your other options are? We haven't
mm,
given people those options. We haven't had the luxury of even thinking about what those options are and relying on it. Who are those leaders? What are those institutions? We need
mm,
to be building them. We need to be in deep community. We at Equal Ground are not focused on a Republican or a Democratic Party. We have been on tour since the beginning of this year. We've gone to 22 cities and touched a number of counties across this state 22 counties across this state in order to have deep, meaningful conversations with people. Because we do believe when two or three are gathered together,
come
there
on.
are things that can move. There are
That's right.
mountains that can shift, right? And so we're thinking about what those options are. We're learning, we're having conversations, we're healing also in the process. We are leaning on each other to learn about what are the different skills, what are the different tactics, what are the things we have not considered, who are we leaving behind, who do we need to bring into this conversation, knowing that we cannot solve it just in this singular moment. But
Mm.
again, how do we think about it for generations to come? While also actively and rapidly responding to the attacks as they come as well.